My name is Blanca Vega. I am of Ecuadorian descent, and I grew up in New York, born and raised in New York City.
How do you identify?
I identify primarily as Latina, as a woman of color. Secondarily, I identify as Ecuadorian-American. And then I identify as Afro-mestiza.
Why Afro-mestiza?
Because I recognize that phenotypically I have various features that often confuse people. Even I confuse myself sometimes, I guess I should say. Having grown up with light skin, but thick lips, wide nose. Sometimes people think that I'm even Asian sometimes. So, I guess it depends on who's looking at me. And I believe that's why I want to make sure that I include all of what I feel is part of my ancestry. I can't say that I'm European. I also can't say that I'm only African, but I believe that I am of Native American and African descent.
And your name, Blanca. I find it interesting because Blanca is a pretty common name in Latin America. And the fact that Blanca means white in Spanish, however you never hear negra as a name. Why is that?
Well, I should say that in my line, I am the third Blanca. So my grandmother's name is Blanca, my mother's name is Blanca, and so my name. I never felt comfortable with that name because it was so white. I knew what it meant in English, and as a child growing up in New York, I didn't want to associate with whiteness. In my family, whiteness was pretty elevated and celebrated. I feel at the expense of Native American and African people of African descent. And I was always very uncomfortable with that. I was always very uncomfortable with the idea that whiteness could be celebrated in such a way that I didn't feel when I looked in the mirror that I looked white. I mean, I didn't look like Marsha Brady. I didn't look like the white girls, on, the Babysitter's Club. Whenever I saw pictures on books, I didn't look like them. So I could never really identify as white, even though my family identified as white. So my name, I never used my name up until I was like 18, really, my first name. Because I felt a strong aversion to whiteness. I felt like it covered up the rest of who I was and why I looked this way.
That's interesting. You say that your family identifies as white. To this day?
I think not anymore because, I constantly, I've been talking about this since I was a child. I've always been racially conscious. I don't know where that comes from. But again, I think it has to do with looking at myself in the mirror and saying this doesn't match up to what America calls white, right? To what U.S. girls call white. I don't look like that. So for me, I really have always been searching for what my racial identity, is. And
does anybody in your family reflect that U.S. whiteness that you're
I think there's some people in my family. We have different kinds of people in my family. We have people who are really, really dark, and we have people who look really, really Asian, and then we have other people who look really, really white. Blonde hair, green eyes. In fact, that's one of the things that gets touted, in my family history on my father's side, is that I have a grandmother who was blonde hair and green eyed. And again, I think that not anymore. I think, my father, his racial sensibilities have been, softened, I think, after many battles between me and him about who he was. He's a dark man who's darker than I am. So for him to claim whiteness I felt was, you know, sort of a slap in my face, a slap in my mother's face. My mom is also just as light as I am, but she also has more prominent features, like, you know, fuller lips and, you know, wider nose. And I think that, but she, you know, she never really talked about her racial identity. It's not something that's really discussed, I think, you know, by my mom. But my father talked about it all the time. Oh, venimos de España y de Italia. But lucky for me, my father is, you know, is smart. And I think that, like I said, after many battles, I think now he starts to recognize himself as not white. But it's still present in my family, for sure.
So does the African ancestry or indigenous ancestry, does that get degraded in favor of touting the Italian and the Spanish?
I wouldn't say that it was degraded. I think that it's more erased. It's not talked about. And I think that this has to do for a couple of reasons. One, you know, is obviously, you know, being able to align yourself with whiteness and receiving the privileges that come along with that. But two, historically in Latin America, racism doesn't exist, right? So this idea of la raza cósmica, this idea of mestizaje, I think has done an interesting, has affected our Latin American psyche in an interesting way, in the sense that we will say that we're not white, but we also won't say that we're black. And so I think the second part of my family's narrative around race is that historically it hasn't been enforced. You know, finding your native grandmother or your black grandfather is not something that you are looking for, right? You're looking for whiteness. You're looking for some kind of way to alleviate your own oppression, and often that means a history of whiteness. It's just, that's just the way that Latin Americans work.
So it's to align yourself with the oppressors then?
I would say so, yeah. Because again, you know, what does that mean? You know, it means, you know, better job opportunities. It means that you're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be poor. You're supposed to be, you know, you were once in Europe and you were once, you know, someone who had status, right? Racism is a hell of a drug. You know, and I shouldn't just say racism, but white supremacy. You know, let's be more specific. I think that people throw around the word racism, they don't know what it means. But white supremacist values in Latin America, very strong. They're very strong. My racial identity is has always been a journey for me. Because in Ecuador, I don't have much experience living in Ecuador, knowing Ecuadorian history. Ecuadorian history is not really a part of the Latino narrative here in the United States. So for me, being Ecuadorian has been a constant search. Being born and raised in New York, and being educated in U.S. schools. So in that sense, being Ecuadorian has been a journey for me. The racialization of Ecuadorians, I think, has really been a part of that journey. And when I went to Ecuador, maybe 2-3 years ago now, when I would go to museums, I never saw an African presence, you know, and that could be my own lack of knowledge of where to go, who to talk to, but to know that in the prominent sites of Ecuador, right, where most tourists would go, an African presence is not there. You know, that says something. And so when I went to one particular museum, I believe El Museo de Naim Isaías in Guayaquil, which was one of the largest ports in South America to receive Africans. that museum, you know, it was all about the colonization of Ecuador and the impact that it had on it. And, you know, they showed all of these white enslavers and colonizers. And then in the back of this room was this one picture of this one black woman. Nobody else of color, not even like a Native American person. They were all like Spaniards, right? And then you see this one black woman, and her name is Maria Chiquinquira. And they only had one little caption. And next to her picture was this, you know, the copy of this legal transcript. So of course, when I got home, I had to do this research on who Maria Chiquinquira was, because there is, you know, I don't know any history on Afro-Ecuadorians. Like, the term didn't even connect. Saw a picture of her, I thought, these features are mine. I don't know if she is connected to me, you know, in any biological sense, but the idea that this woman was from Guayaquil, which is where my mother's from, that she was a black woman, and that she was highly intelligent, you know, helped me realize how deeply embedded our racism is. The tragedy of not understanding who we really are, and how I am connected to that history in one way or another, biologically, whether it's because she's a woman who won her freedom, you know, whether she's a black woman and I'm a woman of color, you know, who works for racial justice in the United States. I have a connection with this woman, and she's Ecuadorian, and she's a hero. And who knows any Ecuadorian heroes? Afro-Ecuadorian heroes. And that's how I feel connected to her. My family members in Ecuador who came to the United States and stayed with my family. And I remember, you know, my aunt just staring at me, and she would say to my mother, like, you know, mija, su hija zambita. Now, my aunt, she, I don't know if she ever called herself an AfroEcuadorian. I don't think she ever would, because she, her family members are all really light-skinned, but she was the only dark-skinned woman. I don't know if she ever called herself Zambita, but I've also heard her call her son Sambo. But I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what samba was, except that the look of horror around my family members' faces when they heard that. They're like, no, she's not. Ella no es ninguna samba. No, no digas eso de mi hija, que ella no es ninguna samba. And I remember thinking, okay, this I have to investigate. I looked it up in the dictionary, and I saw that samba was a derogatory word for being black. I had no idea until your work, really, that that Sambos with the Z has an interesting history in Ecuador. In fact, in the 1500s, they were a ruling people. Sambos were African and native, and I thought, I've been a samba my whole life, but I thought it was such a negative thing, you know. And of course I would wear it proudly, you know. It's more like, yeah, I'm samba, so what, you know. But I thought, I never knew that it actually had a different history than the one that was described to me in my American dictionaries, right? It's not just a pejorative for black people. if you go into Ecuadorian history, it's actually, you know, something is a ruling class of people, you know, who were African and who were native, you know, a mixture of the two. And I thought that I'm samba, I'm a zambita through and through. Like, this is who I am, this is where I come from, this is, you know, how I should be identifying. For me, I had pelo malo because in my family, because I was the one with the curly hair. Now I'm older and it kind of straightened out after years of looking at teen magazine and trying to straighten out my hair and wondering why is it that, you know, I don't have hair like, you know, the rest of people in my family. And then I go to Ecuador, I visit my family members there, and I see that on my mom's side, everybody had hair like me. And, you know, and I would ask them, like, well, because my hair is not the kind of curly hair that, you know, you could just wake up and go and you put gel in it and that's it. Like, for me, like, it would, you know, it's frizzy. So I would always ask them, like, what? I remember being 15 and asking them, how do you keep your hair so nice and curly? One is because of the climate. It's humid already, so you don't have much work, you know, it just will, my hair will naturally curl up in that kind of environment. And then two, they were like, do you brush your hair? And I said, yeah. They said, stop brushing your hair. I was like, wait a minute. So the brush has been the tool of my oppression forever. When my family members told me stop brushing your hair, it was the most liberating experience I've ever, like, when my hair is curly, like, in the summer, I don't hardly ever brush my hair. Again, it adds all of these issues to your understanding of your racial identity. You know, it makes you realize that it's not, skin color is very important, but it's not all of it. And then again, sort of growing up with why of all the people in my family, why was I the one who was, you know, had this racial consciousness? Again, was it because I didn't have the straight hair and I dealt with my mom pulling it? Was it because I did have the big lips and I've been growing up hearing about my big lips over and over again, and, you know, it being always referred to as being an African feature? Was it because I was called zambita since I was 6 years old? All of that.
Mejorar la raza or adelantar la raza throughout your life, and who has said it to you?
Mostly men. Mostly dark-skinned men. I haven't heard that from women. I've read that. I know that mine is not a unique experience. And certainly in the United States, that's sort of an experience here when it comes to colorism and, you know, improving, you know, your race, so to speak. But I've heard that from men, and it's obviously come around the time of my dating time. You know, when men have sought partners, you know, when they didn't want their children to be as dark as they were. You know, dating would soon enough stop after I would say, what do you mean by that? And we would get into a debate, and why is it that I always talk about race and, you know, how I ruin things. Like, yeah, it's kind of ruining. If you think, like, what if our children don't come out white? Big surprise, you know, like, you never know what you're going to get with me. I don't think they saw it as hating themselves. I don't think that, again, that's one of the complexities of racism, that you don't know that you're hating yourself. White privilege sort of says you're not hating yourself because you're trying to be like me. You know, and if you're trying to be like me and you're almost like me, then you're okay. You're getting the jobs, you're getting the better education, you're getting the better treatment. I think those are the things that make people think that they're not hating themselves, and why there's such conflict between those of us who are racially conscious and those who are not.
Because you're just trying to improve yourself. Right.
And what's wrong with improving yourself? I mean, we're also, you know, big, you know, proponents of the bootstrap theory. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps and do it on your own. And if you could do that through marriage, marry a white woman. You know, you know, I mean, it's all of these ways of elevating what you think is elevating yourself and your status, and that is really at the detriment of your society and I think yourself, your individual spirit. We often hear certain things being how we're being described, and what I remember growing up hearing a lot that, because I'm from Guayaquil, I'm a mona. Now I had no idea, and I still don't to this day, where that term comes from. But I do know, again, that, I'm learning that Guayaquil was one of the largest ports for Africans during that slave trade, and also knowing that in Ecuador we have very specific pockets of where the AfroEcuadorians have resided and built communities. So in Guayaquil, from what I've been told, that being called Mona is a positive thing because it meant that you were pretty. But Mona also translates. I mean, Mona is a monkey, right? And it's not a coincidence that you have this high influx of Africans who have, come into Guayaquil, resided there, and, mixing with the whites and other native people. It's not a surprise that you would be called Mona, right? If you're, and so how I have heard that term mostly especially around my dating life, when I have dated Ecuadorian men, and they would say, oh yeah, you're Mona, but because of your light skin, tú vas a mejorar la raza. And that sort of, again, it's almost like they're making, for me, I've always heard this, like, even though, yeah, your lips may be big, but your skin color, that helps. It's almost like they're making concessions, right? My body is a reflection of a concession. Okay, so you have all these African features, but you're white. You got this white skin, so
it makes up for it.
It makes up for it, right? And that's always been very conflicting for me when I hear other women go through that, and they're kind of flattered. Oh, you're picking me because I have this light skin. It's like, but that's not a flattering thing. To me, it's not a flattering thing. To me, again, it's sort of like a concession. You have all of these other features that make you not white, but here's this one large organ on your body called your skin that happens to be, light. Now, when I talk to, other white women who are lighter than I am, they're sort of like, you're not white. You're that olive complexion. It depends on the community that I'm in. I'm definitely Mona because my mother is from Guayaquil. They're like, oh, that's why. You're from Guayaquil. That's why you look this way. But if I'm in, a Dominican community, a Haitian community, I'm not necessarily, that dark-skinned woman that I would be in a white community. So here, where I work, it's totally of my, the exceptional Latina, right? I made it, and again, all of those messages sort of from my own, people from my own country, my own motherland, to being someone who has been raised here. All these different messages of how they perceive my racial identity, it has been an interesting one to analyze. Now I think in our narrative in the United States, where we're sort of saying, we're here, and we, whether you like it or not, my strong features, come from somewhere. Whether it's because I'm Samba, whether it's because I'm Africana, whether it's Afro-Latina, whether it's because I'm a mestiza, whatever it is. I'm not just white and I'm not just Native American. And that kind of recovery of who we are, has been important for me to sort of say, I'm not just a light-skinned Latina woman. There's a history behind all of these features, and now I'm being able to, through finding Maria Chiquinquirá, to understanding who the Sambo Nation really were. I think that has helped me gain more understanding of my racial identity as an Ecuadorian-American woman.